Tishani Whitlow. We start with news in the pandemic. Pfizer announcing today the results of its vaccine trial for children ages 5 to 11. The pharmaceutical giant tested a lower dose on kids, about a third of what is currently approved for adults. The company says the results show the vaccine is safe, and it also generated a robust antibody response. Pfizer plans to submit the findings to the FDA as part of a request for emergency use authorization. The former White House coronavirus testing Cesar says the news is reason for cautious optimism.
This is very good news. We only have the press release from Pfizer, but I would expect, as they suggested, that the immune response in children is very robust, and apparently that's what it shows. I'm sure that the FDA Advisory Committee will be weighing the risk benefits. We know there are lots of cases in children, but the risk of dying is still very, very low, so that risk benefit is going to be very important to be weighed.
All right, here with me now to discuss this further is Dr. Cedric Dark. He is an emergency room physician in Houston. He's also the assistant professor of emergency medicine at Baylor College of Medicine. Dr. Dark, welcome to BNC Live. It's a pleasure to have you. Sir, did you see Pfizer's announcement as good news?
I do see it as good news, but I do think we need to be very attentive to the fact that we should not be making any decisions off of press releases. We shouldn't be making decisions off of preprints. We should be making our decisions off of peer-reviewed data. And I am hopeful that we'll see the data and see how well it performs for our kids.
All right, so where do we go from here? You said don't make plans off of that press kit, but as you know, cases are surging among children right now. They account for a third of them.
Right, cases are surging. And, you know, this study right now, from what Pfizer has told us, there's 2,200 kids involved with it. As you said, the doses are smaller than what's currently being used in our adolescents. The good news is they mentioned that there are no myocarditis cases in children given the vaccine. There's about 1,400 kids that received the vaccine versus those that were in the placebo group. But in order to really make sure that parents are satisfied with the safety of this, they probably need larger studies. At the rate right now that we're seeing myocarditis in young people, we're talking about probably needing about 15,000 children to be able to pick up that signal. We may not be able to get that until post surveillance, perhaps.
Well, let's talk about that because that inflammation was also an issue that was impacting Black and brown children disproportionately.
Definitely is. There's a concern amongst Black and brown children and amongst white people as well in terms of whether or not parents want to give vaccines to their children. And when you look at a recent Kaiser Family Foundation poll, about 40% of parents are in a wait and see approach. That wait and see approach differs markedly whether or not the parents are vaccinated themselves. Parents that are unvaccinated are really less likely to vaccinate their children. And I think one of the things we need to do is make sure that we have robust safety data on kids. Now, one thing I'd like to explain, a lot of people are worried about side effects, whether it's long-term or short-term side effects, but one of the short-term side effects we have seen is myocarditis. Now, if you look at the number of people that get myocarditis from the vaccine, we're talking about 67 per million for young adults, okay? Now, I want to compare this to some data that we have from the Big Ten Sports Conference. They actually studied all their athletes and looked at it. And if you look at the number of athletes they have, the likelihood that they get COVID, and then the likelihood of getting myocarditis as a consequence of COVID, which is a thing, you actually see a nearly 100-fold difference relative to getting COVID and getting myocarditis from that than getting it from the vaccine. The vaccine so far, at least 100 times safer than getting COVID and getting that side effect from COVID itself. And so that's something that I know parents are concerned about side effects in their kids, but one of the things we've seen with real-time data is that the vaccine is still safer in young people than is coronavirus itself.
All right, so Dr. Dark, what should parents take away from this then?
Well, I think if you're ready to get your kids vaccinated, if the data holds out per what Pfizer is suggesting, go ahead and get your kids vaccinated. If you're concerned, talk to your physician about it, talk to your pediatrician to see what they say, if that's what your concern is. And if you want to wait a little bit just to see how it plays out once these vaccines roll out, similar to what we've done with adults, I expect that we will see overwhelmingly stronger benefits over risks when it comes to vaccination versus risking your kid catching a disease, which right now, 1 out of 3 people that gets COVID winds up with long-term symptoms like headaches, fatigue, shortness of breath, chest pain. I think it would be worthwhile to have your kids not have to live with a lifetime of those symptoms
And
by letting them get vaccinated.
I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Dr. Dark. What do we know about the long-term impacts of COVID on the developing brain of a young child?
You know, we don't have a lot of long-term data. Remember, we're only about 1.5 years into this pandemic, and so we're still collecting all that information. But we do know that a large portion of people that have contracted the disease wind up having a condition we call brain fog, one of the long COVID symptoms, and that's somewhere about 1 in 10 patients have this symptom long term. So I think when you look at it, it's better to not get the disease than it is to wait for it to come and get you.
All right, but seeing how political this pandemic has become, from the mask mandates to the vaccine mandates, is this a short victory, a small victory, better yet, with an uphill battle in terms of convincing parents to actually go ahead and vaccinate their kids?
I mean, these vaccines are a humongous victory for getting over this pandemic. Right now, I think we have to do the work of convincing people that they're safe and effective. And we know for adults, the Pfizer vaccine has been proven safe and effective by the FDA. You know, and a lot of people want to do their own research. I think you can trust your physicians. Folks like myself, we've done the research for you. Before I put Pfizer into my body, I looked at the studies and I determined that for my risk tolerance and risk benefit ratio, it was better to get the vaccine than to risk getting COVID.
Yeah, absolutely, Dr. Dark. Okay, so when can we actually expect children to be able to roll up their sleeves at age group 5 to 11?
We're still probably looking at a few more months before that vaccine gets emergency use authorization. And the timeline for that, I think, is going to be up to the FDA's approval process. And again, physicians like myself, we want to see people vaccinated, but we want to make sure that the process isn't subverted, and we want to make sure that all the process follows normally with as much speed as is possible by getting rid of sort of the unnecessary red tape involved with the normal approval.
All right, and my last question for you, there is some reports that Pfizer is also doing some testing on babies as young as 6 months. When can we expect some protection for them as well?
A little bit further from that, again, this data only applies from the 5 to 11-year-old group. There is information that they are hopefully studying, putting in together and packaging and getting that out for the 6-month, the 5-year-old group, but we still are a few more months down the road.
All right, Dr. Dark, you have the name of a villain, but you are most certainly a superhero in a white jacket. Thank you for all that you do, sir. It was a pleasure talking with you today. And President Biden is revving up his push to fight COVID-19 by vaccinating more Americans. It comes as 24 attorneys generals threaten to sue